I'm Mark Golub, and in the news, the continuing aftermath of the tragic murders at the Inland Regional Center in San Bernardino, California, a mass murder that's becoming more and more commonplace on the American scene. And if you watched my recent conversation with Alan Dershowitz, one of the most upsetting statistics of American life today is that there have been more individual incidents of mass murder in which 4 or more people have been the victims of shooting. There have been more individual acts of mass murder in America this year than there have been days in the year. The San Bernardino murders was the 355th separate mass shooting that's taken place in our country this year, the 355th. And on the day of that mass murder, it was only the 336th day of this calendar year. In 336 days, there have been 355 mass shootings in America. In fact, the shooting in San Bernardino was the 3rd mass shooting since the prior week's shooting at the Planned Parenthood Clinic in Colorado Springs. So when the President of the United States says that no country on earth experiences the kind of mass murders that we've come to know here in America, he is absolutely right. And while there's no reason to trivialize the horror of the recent jihadist attacks in Paris and in other cities around the world, the truth is they do not in any way compare to the kind of gun violence and death which occurs now over and over and over again in our country. There's something terribly, terribly wrong somewhere. And whether it's better law enforcement and monitoring, whether it's increased care and control of those who are mentally ill, or whether it's a matter of crafting a saner and more effective gun control policy in this country, it is crystal clear something's wrong and that the current wave of gun violence and murder must be effectively addressed. Well, to give us a first-hand sense of what the people of San Bernardino have experienced, we're pleased to be joined now by Rabbi J. Sherwood, Rabbi of Congregation Emanu-El, which is in Redlands, California, a community adjacent to San Bernardino. And Jay, thank you so much for joining us on JBS.
Oh, my pleasure, Mark. Thanks for having me.
Jay, first of all, give us a sense of how your community and the people of San Bernardino and your own community, which is adjacent, how you've experienced this event.
I'll tell you, the community is quite in shock, knowing, first of all, that San Bernardino has gone through quite a bit of economic struggle in the last several years, but a very strong community. And to have something like this happen in our midst, no community thinks something like this is going to happen. The community was in shock and, quite frankly, in fear. Our congregation was founded in 1851 in San Bernardino and only moved to Redlands a few years ago. And Redlands is connected to this event as well. The FBI is currently going through the apartment of the 2 perpetrators here, going through finding bomb material, et cetera, only about a mile and a half away from our congregation right now in Redlands. People have been scared. People are finding a tiny bit of comfort in knowing that there were no other perpetrators, but people are still walking around scared and saddened, and nobody really knows how to react yet. People are just still trying to digest exactly what happened yesterday.
By the way, tell us something about your congregation, Jay. First of all, I don't want to make any assumptions. Which movement are you affiliated with?
The congregation is affiliated with the Reform movement. It was founded in 1851 by a gentleman by the name of Jacob Rich, who brought a Torah scroll over the mountains with a Mormon wagon train. And the congregation existed in San Bernardino for well over 100 years before moving just over to the next community in Redlands because of demographics and such.
I see.
It's affiliated with the Reform movement, but has some more traditional elements within it as well.
And where did you get your smicha? Where were you ordained?
I was ordained at the Academy for Jewish Religion, California, in Los Angeles.
And how long have you been with this congregation?
I'm actually the new guy in town. I started as the full-time rabbi on July the 1st, but for the year before that, I came in to work with their school and fix things up in the school, and I guess I did a good job, so they asked me to stick around.
Well, mazal tov to you, and I hope your service and tenure at the synagogue is a successful one, both for you and for the congregation. Are you married, Jay?
I am.
Children?
I am. My wife, Lisa, and I are married. We have 2 children. We have a 10-year-old daughter and a 26-year-old son, a little age difference in between.
Very nice. Are you worried for which child is the younger child?
My daughter.
Are you worried for your daughter?
I'm not worried for my daughter. I know that this is an isolated incident. Unfortunately, it's an isolated incident that seems to happen every single day in the United States. But I don't think there's an imminent danger just by being in the San Bernardino area right now. As you said in your remarks a little earlier, this seems to be becoming a daily event. It really saddens me to think that this is becoming the new norm. But I'm not feeling imminent fear for my daughter or any of the other kids. I am feeling that I and other clergy in the area of other faiths are trying to work with the mayor and with the schools to try and help these kids process what happened in their community. I'm fearful of them not being able to process it. But as far as personal safety, I don't think we have something to be fearful of directly at this moment.
Okay, I understand completely. And now I want to come back to a comment you made earlier, where you seem to feel that there were congregants of yours who did experience fear even today. And I want comment on that for me, because for you, you don't see this as something that should frighten you, your wife, or your daughter at the moment, but you did say there are congregants who are frightened.
Right, and most of their fear is from being. We have congregants who live near where the events happened, and who were evacuated from their homes while the events were going on. And some of that fear continues. I actually spoke with one of my congregants this morning. She was very, very upset. She read something that I had sent to the congregation and inspired her to give me a call. She was standing outside with one of her Muslim neighbors, and a car drove around the block 3 times so that they could call her Muslim neighbor a terrorist and curse her Muslim neighbor. It was just a mild-mannered woman who lives 2 doors down from my congregant. And the congregant said to me, she was fearful for her, not only for her friend, but for herself, that somebody would take the time to drive 3 times around the block and speak in, quite frankly, very threatening language.
Now, I should tell our audience, as you and I are speaking here on In the News, there is no direct evidence that the 2 individuals who perpetrated the mass murder in San Bernardino were, in fact, jihadists involved in a terrorist attack. In general, Jay, do you fear that there will be some kind of backlash, some kind of striking out against Muslims in this country because either of your specific situation in San Bernardino or because we're seeing a general anti-Muslim jihadist sentiment? And I want to make sure the audience understands me. I feel there is some real reason to be anti-jihadist at the moment, and the jihad is a piece of the Islamic religious world, but it certainly does not represent the Muslim world as a whole. To what extent, Jay, do you worry for an inappropriate Islamophobia developing either in San Bernardino or wherever your community is located, or in California, or in the nation as a whole?
I think we're already seeing it. We're hearing it from presidential candidates. We're hearing it from television news pundits, and we're hearing it here in the community. I just, before we started talking, I just left a lunch meeting of our local clergy association, and there were a few Muslim clergy and some other Muslim scholars who were with us, and one of the women there spoke of that she's very fearful for her younger sister, who is on a college campus and has a scarf on her head and looks the part of the stereotypical Muslim. And she's very, very scared for her sister today and going into the future of how her sister is going to be treated on campus. I think we need to be sure that we, as a Jewish community, speak out against Islamophobia. This is not something that is a Muslim thing. This is something that is a jihadist thing. There are certainly evil elements that are within that jihadist world of Islam, but that does not represent the entire Islamic world. And I think that we need to be careful with how we speak about it and we need to be careful to correct others, because it's not something that I'm fearful is going to happen in the future. It's something that I see happening right this very moment.
That's very interesting, and it's interesting to hear your perspective. By the way, I need to understand more because I don't want a comment that you make to go without your having a chance to clarify it. I have not heard any presidential candidate of either party say anything different than you've just said, that there is within the Muslim world a jihadist element that is both radical, anti-Western, violent, and would be very happy to create a caliphate that would challenge the West. I have not heard any candidate of either party generalize beyond that. Have you?
I've heard candidates speak of making lists of Muslims in the country, and heard candidates speak of that we need to be watching all of the mosques in the country. And that's been in the news recently.
I've not heard Donald Trump use the word all. And my understanding is, and I'm only speaking now out of the New York area where I've had some experience. I know that for periods of time, there are specific mosques which have been identified by the FBI and other law enforcement agencies to be a place where there is a fomenting of anti-American and jihadist sentiment. They are very specific mosques and not a general broad brush sweeping notion that every mosque in America is a potential jihadist mosque. But there have been places in America which have been singled out by law enforcement agencies as places that are of serious concern. I have heard that notion in America, but I have not heard a broad stroke where any responsible person of either party has suggested that all Muslims are a problem. And I just want to make sure that, when somebody of your stature comes on and says that you hear a kind of Islamophobia coming out of a presidential race, I don't want you to be misunderstood, and I want to make sure you have a chance to clarify what you mean, because at least, Jay, from my perspective, that tends to be a rhetoric of the American media, which I find to be as onerous and as upsetting as I would find the situation you described, where somebody's driving around a block 3 times and your congregant fears for either their safety or the safety of a friend of theirs who happens to be part of the Islamic community. That to me is very, very upsetting. I haven't heard of it here on the East Coast so much, but do I think it happens in America? To some extent I do. But that's different than my saying that in general there is within either party, Democrat or Republican, an anti-Islamic move in general. And again, you and I may disagree on this, Jay. My own feeling is that is a media creation which I don't want to be, I don't want it to influence me in an unfair way.
Right. And I don't think that's the mainstream view in either of the political parties. But, Donald Trump was certainly asked, I guess it was a week or two ago, about making a list of Muslims in the country and keeping a list. And he made a comment about that he would be in favor of that. And there are other members of Congress that have, in the media, made rather anti-Islamic comments. Many of them state senator types and mayors and such. But I think we need to be very careful with that sort of rhetoric. We have governors who are saying we're not going to take in any Syrian refugees because they might be hiding Islamic terrorists among the Syrian refugees. This is the kind of rhetoric we heard. We're not going to take in any Jews during World War II because there might be Nazis who are hiding amongst the Jews who are coming in. And we need to be careful when we hear governors and mayors and such speaking in that way. And it's upsetting to hear them speak those sorts of words.
Okay, the problem here is, and again, I think you are putting your finger on issues that are so important for we who are Americans and American Jews to try to understand. And I'm almost sorry now that we're not sitting face to face in studio. I have studied a great deal about the Holocaust, Jay. I never found ever did I find one comment in any text that said that the argument about keeping Jews out of America, not opening the doors of this country during World War II, was ever motivated because people were worried that Nazi spies were going to come in with Jews from Poland and from Russia and from parts of Eastern Europe and even from Germany. I don't remember that ever being one of the arguments. And while I feel that the issue of Syrian refugees is very, very complicated, at the same time, I don't see an analogy between the Jews who were being systematically exterminated by Nazi Germany and the civil war that is taking place in Syria. And therefore, I feel that the discussion of what we should do with Syrian refugees is at least a valid discussion. And again, I don't see the Nazi analogy that you drew. Now, if you did come across that, I want you to tell me that because it's important for our audience to hear it, and I may be missing something or I may be mistaken. At what point did you come across, places where America argued the reason why we're not going to let the St. Louis dock is because we're afraid that there are some Nazi spies.
And I didn't say that America argued. I'm saying there was among some people there was such rhetoric, and we actually have records of such rhetoric. I'll see if I could send you a little bit of it.
Sure.
When we're finished here. So I'm not making an analogy that's what's going on in Syria is the same as what was going on with Jews in Europe, but in that from some quarters we get this sort of rhetoric that is, I believe, worrying about problems that don't exist. It's certainly valid. We need to figure out what are we going to do with refugees, but it's when we are couching rhetoric that we hear from some quarters in our country that are making generalizations. This is the Islamophobia that I think is growing, and we need to be aware of.
Okay, very good. Talk to me about gun control now, Jay. I'd love to have an idea of where you feel your congregation stands on this. Many people feel that the constant, and as you point out, it's almost daily now, there are mass shootings, that there is an element that demands greater gun control in this country. And I want to say to you first that there are those who disagree and who would argue that sadly, tragically, no matter what gun control legislation you imposed, it would never prevent an event like the one that you have experienced in San Bernardino. And, Jay, we're coming up on the 3rd anniversary of the Newtown mass shootings at the elementary school where 26 people, some of them, there were teachers also, who were murdered, happened. And the argument against this being a gun control issue is that while we may need more gun control, no gun control could stop what happened in San Bernardino or what happened in Newtown. And I'm curious to know, what do you feel your congregation would say? What would you say?
Our congregation is really a mixed bag. We are in an area here, the Inland Empire of California, which is one of the more conservative areas in California politics and in national politics in some sense as well. We have members of our congregation who are the stereotype of the bleeding heart liberal, and we have members of our congregation who are the stereotype of the gun-toting NRA member.
Very interesting.
And then so we have people who fit in between those stereotypes as well. But we have quite a broad spectrum within the congregation. So there are those who would say that this is not a gun control issue, that criminals are going to get guns the way that criminals are going to get guns. And there are those who would say that there are things that we can do, and there are those who would say that we should be looking at countries like Australia who passed laws about assault rifles and such, and to remove more threat of mass shootings. So our congregation is really a mixed bag. I look at things and I think that there are common sense laws that either have been passed and are not being enforced or need to be passed that we can do at least to eliminate some of these things that happen.
Mm-hmm. For example,
for example, there's a law that's been proposed now that I see about taking the names that are on the no-fly list and making it so that they are not allowed to get guns as they go through the process of background checks. This seems to be a very logical law to me.
Yes. Would you be
additionally making it so that there need to be background checks not just for those who purchase guns at regulated establishments, but those who purchase them on the internet or at gun shows, where the depending upon the state, the laws of background checks they vary from place to place. But I think there should be a background check for every single gun that is purchased.
Yes, I agree with you, and I am baffled that has not become American law. And I'm told, how strong the NRA is. But it seems to me that this does not limit people's right to own a gun from the NRA's perspective, insisting that there be the kind of background checks that you are talking about. Why do you think, Jay, we haven't seen that part of American law?
It really baffles me.
Right.
I wonder, does it cut into the profit margin of the gun companies? Is there something else that I just don't know about? Because it seems to make just complete common sense to me.
Yes.
And it wouldn't stop anybody who's a law-abiding citizen from getting whatever guns and ammunition and such that they wanted, and it wouldn't make any dent in that whatsoever. As far as I can see, I don't understand it, but that's not already the law in the country.
Yes. Although it's interesting, Jay, you think it may be about money.
That's one guess.
Yes. My own sense is I don't see why any American should be entitled to purchase and own automatic weapons and large amounts of ammunition. If somebody says, I want a gun to hunt with, and hunting is a sport in America, I assume really the law should permit that. And I guess, I've had a discussion with many people about whether the Second Amendment was ever intended to allow individuals to have handguns at home. But I don't think, Jay, we're going to ever change that law, certainly not in the near future. But there's one thing about a handgun or a rifle, and another thing when you're getting, really automatic weapons that shoot a whole series of bullets. A certain number of bullets, ammunition is shot in X number of seconds. It seems to me, Jay, that America as a whole should draw a line there and that the NRA should live with it. What's your sense?
I very much agree with you, Mark. It's amazing to me why any person needs an assault rifle, which is designed specifically to shoot lots of bullets and kill lots of people in a short amount of time. I think it's fine to own a handgun, to own a rifle. This is, as you said, a sport in America to go not only hunting, but also, target shooting is another sport that is popular in some parts of our country. But the idea that people need to own assault rifles, people need to own clips of bullets that hold 10 or 20 or more bullets in them, it's beyond me why anybody would need any of those things. I would be in favor of a law that would outlaw them.
I would too.
It makes no sense to me that anybody would need that sort of thing in their home.
Yes. By the way, I am sanguine over the issue of whether better gun control law would prevent a kind of event that happened, again, in Newtown that we're about to celebrate the anniversary of, the third anniversary, or what happened tragically, a mile and a half away or so from your synagogue in San Bernardino. At the same time, it seems to me that it would send a message that would color the attitude Americans have about guns. And the more responsible gun legislation we could have, even if it does not stop an event like these tragedies from happening, still is good for the overall well-being, the psychic and emotional and intellectual well-being of America. And again, I ask whether you feel the same way.
Mark, I think you've hit it right on the nail on the head there. I think that it would change the psychology. And I'll tell you this: you mentioned at the beginning of the broadcast here that there have been 355 mass shootings so far this year. If these gun laws or changes in gun laws, getting rid of assault rifles, would get rid of 5 of those mass shootings, 10 of those mass shootings, 50% of those mass shootings, even if they didn't stop all of them, if they stopped some of them, isn't it worth passing these laws so we can save some lives?
I certainly feel it's worth a try. And as you say, if you and I both know the Talmudic dictum, most American Jews know it as well. If you save a single life, you're counted as if you've saved all humanity. Wouldn't it be wonderful, even if one were stopped? But I think, again, you say it very, very well. I have enjoyed meeting you on the phone. I hope that one day I get to meet with you in person. I'd love to know more about the community you serve. You describe such an interesting community, Jay, because most of us think everybody in California is ultra-liberal, and that every Jew in California is ultra-liberal. And what you said is your congregation both is sort of a balance, and you have some who lean more to the right and some lean more to the left. Does that create a problem for you as a rabbi? And you sound to me, you can correct me if I'm wrong, you sound to me that if you had to place yourself, you'd be center-left in the Jewish world today. Does it create any problems for you serving as a rabbi in a congregation where there is such a strong preponderance of those who feel, who lean left and lean right, Jay?
Yeah, I wouldn't classify it as a problem. I would say that it sometimes gives interesting challenges.
Yes.
But I will tell you that when I give sermons that might be political, which I think I give political sermons less often than many rabbis do, but when I do have politics that enter my sermon, and when I'm in discussions in classes where politics enters, my goal is to get people to think. Mm-hmm. I really think that's what a rabbi should do.
Good for you.
Our place as a rabbi, I mean, rabbis were teachers, and essentially that's what I feel like I am. I'm a teacher, and a teacher is not supposed to give you all of the answers. A teacher is supposed to give you stuff to think about. And so that's when I'm preaching, when I'm teaching, that's what I'm trying to do, give people things to think about. You might disagree with what I have to say about it, and I'm okay with that. You might agree with what I have to say about something, and I'm okay with that too. But if you're thinking about it, if what I have said makes you think about the issues, then I think I've done my job as a rabbi.
Congregation Emanu-El is very lucky to have you, Jay, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you myself. Again, one day we'll meet in person and we'll talk more about Jewish life, the American rabbinate, the relationship between American Jewry and Israel, and all other issues which obviously consume our attention all the time. But Jay, I thank you very much for these moments here on JBS.
Oh, I look forward to meeting you in person one day as well, and thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
You be well. Jay Sherwood, Rabbi of Congregation Emanu-El in Redlands, California, which is a community adjacent to San Bernardino, where the mass murders took place this past Wednesday. And again, you hear Jay speak, and it doesn't matter whether you agree with every point he makes or not. His overall theme is one that I think is good for American Jewry and for America as a whole, and it was a pleasure meeting him and presenting his thoughts to you. My thanks, as always, to our director, Sloan Copeland, production coordinator, Serge Goldberg, to the associate director of JBS, Dara Golub, and to the producer of this edition of In the News, Jan Weiss. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. Be well, my friends.